I chose to do my director presentation project on Robert Eggers. Robert Eggers is an up-and-coming director in the midst of an ever-changing and modernizing film industry. He was born in 1983 and grew up in New Hampshire, eventually started his directing career in New York City, doing experimental street theater, and also designing the sets and costumes himself. Upon being asked by a director to design for her show, he began work as a production designer for theater, dance, TV, and film to pay the bills, all the while chasing his dreams of directing. And his work paid off, as he is now responsible for writing and directing 2015's The Witch and 2019's The Lighthouse. But that's the only work he's actually done on a major scale. So, what makes his work in particular stand out? In short, Robert Eggers shows a very clear dedication and passion for his work. He's an authentic filmmaker, the kind that will insist on using practical effects and refuse to create CGI animals and construct a set from the ground up so as to not compromise his vision. In his own words, a bearded hipster douchebag. He has a unique obsession with historical settings, specifically New England where he grew up. These are incorporated into his films, which are both set within time periods of the past in the region. The Witch in a Puritan farm of the 1600s and the Lighthouse on a maritime island of the late 1800s. Sets were constructed from historical plans, with all props and costumes being historically accurate, and created from scratch if authentic ones couldn't be purchased. Eggers even surrounded himself with historical works to engulf himself in the time period during his pre-production research. For The Witch, that meant going so far as to read Puritan prayer manuals and the Geneva Bible, or study woodcuts of Puritan households. And for The Lighthouse, that meant reading Herman Melville or Robert Louis Stevenson. What Eggers sets out to do is to draw the audience into the world as if they're actually there with the characters. The Witch may be a horror film, but most of your standard horror elements are off-screen or brief, and far and few at that. Suspense is constantly present, but most of the terror comes from the way the family members turn on each other under the stress and fear. It's less about shock and more about the mood and the tone of the movie. And I suppose The Lighthouse is a psychological horror or thriller, but, well, it's one of those movies that feels uncomfortable to label with any specific genre, really. Dialect within his films is accurate to the era, too, with some of it even being pulled directly from period text for The Witch.
Still tastes of the head. I'll find some chark in ye, lad. Now's the time for gab and chatter. Let's be enjoying it. Come a fortnight, the brace of us will be wanting to be ever silent as the tomb.
His stories center around a single location with a very small cast, allowing Eggers to explore the setting in detail and focus the story on the characters. They both focus on self-destructive tendencies of human nature, with characters turning aggressions on each other under pressure. More implicitly, though, both of his films feature commentary on gender roles and personal identities, and they have very open-ended narratives that leave it up to the viewer's interpretation whether or not the film's events should be taken at face value. Another practical aspect Eggers likes to use to his advantage is the lighting. In The Witch, he uses only natural lighting or candlelight, limiting the film to a realistically drab yet hauntingly pretty color palette and style. The Lighthouse, on the other hand, has a visual style that is rather unconventional, shot on 35mm black and white film and featuring a nearly square aspect ratio of 1.19 to 1 to be accurate to the time period. Lighting for scenes had to be cranked up extremely high to be visible, and as a result, every pore, blemish, and disgusting facial feature is drawn out for the audience to see. Eggers practically uses the light as a character itself in The Lighthouse. Willem Dafoe's character repeatedly denies Robert Pattinson's character from operating the lighthouse or even being inside of it, much to Pattinson's dismay. This is visually reflected by Pattinson being repeatedly engulfed in shadows throughout much of the movie, by Dafoe getting between Pattinson and the scene's light source when Pattinson voices his frustration, and in every single dinner conversation by situating the light source right in the center of the table between the two of them. Eggers' background in theater is showcased in scenes containing lengthy monologues and conversations in single locations. The script for The Lighthouse actually reads like a play often, as the characters spend most of their conversations in tight little rooms with not much motion. The Lighthouse is greatly inspired by collaborations between playwright Harold Pinter and film director Joseph Losey. Other influences for the movie, according to Eggers, come from a plethora of sources, such as the Greek myths of Prometheus and Proteus, H.P. Lovecraft and Carl Jung. As far as filmmaking is concerned, though, his influences often seem to come from the Dardenne brothers, Fritz Lang, and Ingmar Bergman. As mentioned before, both of these movies he created also have a certain ambiguity to them, where Eggers leaves it to the viewer to decide what actually occurs and what is real in these movies. In The Lighthouse, especially, as it veers into bizarre and abstract territory, ranging from characters staring at the camera on exactly 3 occasions alone, to a character physically embodying a dog on all fours. Robert Pattinson says that Eggers left it up to the actors to decide as well, and he believes that he, Defoe, and Eggers probably all believe they have created 3 completely different movies, which is truly unique. Ultimately, Robert Eggers stands out because of the level of passion he shows for his craft. In modern day, studios dominate the highly competitive film landscape, and that's not to say that's a bad thing, necessarily. But to see a writer-director emerge in the midst of this setting with such a commitment to his work that he's willing to face the hassle of the elements, work with stubborn goats, deal with sinking dollies on rivers, and insist on using fussy practical effects, to show such a degree of risk-taking and originality, well, it's refreshing.